to address all Russia-related issues reportedly to be run by one Jared Kushner. Let's bring in our starting panel on this eventful evening. National reporter for the Washington Post, Robert Costa, who was the author of that second breaking story in the Post on this holiday Friday night. Jeremy Bash is with us, Chief of Staff to both the Director of CIA and the Secretary of Defense during the Obama administration, and former counsel of the House Intelligence Committee. Bianca Golodryga of Yahoo News, a Russia expert in her own right. Matthew Miller, former chief spokesman for the Department of Justice. He's an MSNBC justice and security analyst. And with me here in New York in our studios, Rick Stengel, former Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs at the U.S. State Department in the Obama administration. Also, the former managing editor of Time magazine. Rick Stengel, home field advantage on this one. I want to start off with your reaction to the first of the two Washington Post reports tonight.
Well, I just want to caveat it by saying it's true, but it gets curiouser and curiouser, as Alice said. I guess my first reactions are it's somewhere between extreme naivete and ignorance and something much more dangerous. I mean, if an intelligence officer had done what Mr. Kushner had done, he would be looking at espionage charges now, talking about using an outside channel to talk with a foreign hostile power. It's kind of stunning. The other thing in terms of naivete and ignorance is that anybody who's ever been in the USG knows that the intelligence community monitors all the calls of the Russian ambassador. You can't have a quiet or innocent conversation with the Russian ambassador. And by the way, you can never have an innocent conversation with a Russian in any case who's in government. So again, that's just disturbing that was not known or realized.
Bianca Golodryga, that also speaks to the second part of this story, and that is that they monitored Kislyak expressing surprise along the lines of, "Can you believe our good fortune? I've befriended this young man who's married to the president's daughter and is a future senior advisor."
Yeah, in all his years in Washington, he never thought getting information could be so easy, apparently, but it does fit the pattern of what we've heard earlier in the year about how Jared had met with a bank CEO, a sanctioned bank CEO. Obviously, he forgot to disclose that as well, conveniently. Throughout this campaign, we know that Jared had been the top advisor to this president following each of the debates. The first person Jared would approach would be the president. The first person that the president would approach after a debate would be Jared. We know that Jared had been very close with other Russian billionaires as well, and oligarchs. Roman Abramovich is one of his best friends. His wife, in fact, was Jared and Ivanka's guest at the inauguration. Now, I'm not pinning all the blame and suspicion on every single rich Russian. However, you do have to understand that unlike in the U.S. and businessmen in the U.S., every single oligarch in Russia has the connection to one person, and that is to Vladimir Putin. So his orbit includes a lot of Russians, all of those Russians having a connection, of course, to the president of the country.
Jeremy Bash, before I come to you, I want to share with all of you a moment that transpired on air at this network tonight during the 8 p.m. hour with Chris Hayes. For all those who would like to know how the people in our intelligence and counterintelligence community viewed this story tonight, listen to our own intelligence expert, a veteran of many years in the field, Malcolm Nance.
Some of these contacts are so suspicious that they would have warranted their own counterintelligence investigation. This nation is in a counterintelligence investigation. They are in a spy hunt over at the FBI, and now we have this story, should it prove true, of an American citizen who is the senior advisor to the President of the United States, attempting to establish what we call in the intelligence community covert communications with a hostile nation's potential intelligence agency or senior leadership. That brings you that crosses the line to the Espionage Act of 1917. This cannot be explained. Put aside the other 18 contacts with Moscow. This one incident requires Jared Kushner and all of his immediate staff to have their clearances pulled right now and to have the FBI descend on there and to determine whether this is hostile intelligence in the White House, one step from the president.
There you have it, Jeremy Bash. How serious is this in your eyes, if true?
Sounds pretty serious.
Well, I think it really depends on the underlying conduct by Jared and and what he was talking about with the Russians. If he was trying to engage in normal diplomacy, kind of pre-inauguration diplomacy, there could be a rational explanation for this. Now, the thing and the fact that really is curious is that we don't know why he would have to use a Russian diplomatic facility to have that conversation. I can't think of any real good reason for that. I worked on the intelligence transition in 2008, where we handled all of the incoming diplomacy to the new Obama team. And I can never remember a circumstance in which someone who was coming into government said, I need to have a secret communication with a foreign government and I need to shield it somehow from the existing team. That, Brian, I think is the fact that if is proved to be true is going to be the most troubling fact to explain.
Robert Costa, to the story of yours that came out minutes after this one, is this proof that some people had been looking for in Washington, that where the Senate Intelligence Committee is concerned, and now we're in the Mueller era at the Justice Department, where they are concerned, they do intend to be the adults in the room. They're going to strap on their saddlebags, they're going to the mattresses, and this is going to become real.
It's a smart point, Brian. The Mueller probe, the special counsel, and the FBI are certainly taking the lead when it comes to the Russia interference investigation. But there is another investigation on Capitol Hill, and we've seen Senator Burr, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, build a working relationship, a rapport with the ranking Democrat, Mark Warner of Virginia. And they are moving forward with their own investigation. It's more public in nature, trying to bring people to testify, but it's also about documents and records, and they're pushing the Trump campaign itself, now the Trump political operation, to provide everything possible to the Senate about interactions with Russian figures last year, going even back to 2015.
Robert, I talked to someone close to all the figures in this, has intimate knowledge of all the personalities involved, who said, in effect, you guys may be missing the larger story here. While there could be nefarious goals and aims commingled, this may have been about this young 36-year-old son-in-law of the president, coming from where he came from, knowing he was going to be working for the boss he's working for, wanting control, wanting to be National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, White House Chief of Staff, and on and on. Robert, does that match any of your reporting?
Well, I can tell you that some of my sources within the White House, not always in a positive way, refer to Mr. Kushner as the shadow Secretary of State, think his portfolio is perhaps too large. They also say, his critics inside of the White House, that Kushner, coming in from the New York real estate world, did not realize what he didn't know. And that, as Jeremy and so many others with deep experience are aware of, is that Kislyak and so many foreign diplomats are constantly surveilled. And for Kushner not to recognize that in these exchanges, they think is not only a stumble, but it's a stumble that could have real consequences for this president.
Matthew Miller, I'm trying never to use this construct, but let me try this one on you. If Mark Mezvinsky met with the Russian ambassador and said, my mother-in-law's about to become president, and I'd like to set up a line of communications. Let's get this out of the normal channels. We can use your server, in effect. Imagine our discussion tonight.
Yeah, there'd be impeachment hearings on the Hill. I mean, there were 7 committees that investigated Benghazi. You can only imagine how many would be investigating this. I think the problem with Jared Kushner's conduct is concealment. That's the problem we keep coming back to over and over again. When he had this initial meeting with the Russian ambassador, they brought them in through a back door, not through the front door of Trump Tower, the way other visitors came so publicly. He then didn't report it on his SFA6, his security clearance application form, said it was an oversight. It's hard to understand now that we know the significance of this meeting, what he requested, that it was actually an oversight. We now find out tonight he asked for this secret channel. And we find out that he had 3 other conversations with the Russian ambassador dating back to April, and apparently didn't report those on his SF-86 either. So it's
Oops,
this
I
pattern
just
of
forgot.
concealment that will get the attention of investigators, because when they see someone concealing something, they think that's for a reason. They think it's for something suspicious. And
That's
I guarantee
right.
that's what Bob Mueller will look at, and that's probably what the Senate committee will look at as well.
Rick Stengel, you heard Malcolm Nance, who feels at some level a personal professional insult. This is his life's work, intelligence, counterintelligence. Throughout this, he's been on the air with us a million times. He's been in a state of disbelief that we're having this conversation. He was the first to give voice to this tonight. I've heard some others since. The notion of pulling the security clearance while there are question marks here, while an investigation is going on. Is that realistic?
Well, I would only mention the fact that there were omissions on Mr. Kushner's SF-86 form, which is the form you do for the Office of Personnel Management for high security. I mean, having been a veteran and having gone through those forms many times where they're asking you about every conversation you've ever had with anyone who has a foreign accent, I mean, that is a very troubling thing just in and of itself, because that is the form that gives you security clearance. And if they find that you have been misrepresented things on that form, you shouldn't have security clearance.
Jeremy Bash, you live in the factual world. This may call for a judgment. If this had been anyone else, would he lose his job?
I don't know. Again, I think it really depends on what the underlying conversations were, and if in fact he said, I want to use the facilities of the Russian embassy or the Russian ambassador's home because I want to shield it from U.S. intelligence. I think if someone did that, they would be under scrutiny and they would possibly have their clearances pulled, yes.
And Jeremy, remember all the hubbub about unmasking, something you took great pains to describe for our viewers on the air. Is this not a classic kind of working example of unmasking, where you're the national security advisor for President Obama? It's your intelligence briefing. You are shared with you is intelligence that shows a U.S. person inside Trump Tower having a conversation with the Russian ambassador about setting up a separate channel for communications. Is it not incumbent upon you to say, who is this here? Who's this person talking?
Well, just to be clear, Brian, what the Post report said tonight, and the New York Times also said, wasn't that they intercepted a communication between Jared Kushner and the Russian. They said they intercepted communications between the Russian and their home headquarters in Moscow. And so if they referenced someone by name, there could be an unmasking process if that information was necessary to understand the intelligence. But it wasn't like they were surveilling the actual communications of the U.S.
No, right.
person.
And what I meant was Kislyak, in a quote to the Home Office, could say, I met with, redacted U.S. person who wants to set up a line of communication.
Yes, I would think that would be a classic case where someone, in order to understand that intelligence report, would request that unmasking through the appropriate channel, and that request, I think, would be granted.
Bianna, this gets back to the